over time, governments kept power by controlling the information. They could tell people what they wanted them to know. Now that's changed, and the truth is everywhere to see.
And she in there was like, oh, there's two people, Tommy Robinson and Candace Owens, and they're bad people. And the first thing I do when somebody tells me don't listen to somebody is go find them,
See
right?
what they're saying.
And so I wanted to go see what they had to say. And I have to say, like Tommy Robinson, I'd never really paid attention, but I was like, guy's got some interesting points. If those things were happening to me, I'd want to know, how can we stop people from having grooming gangs in my community? Right. I've almost entirely quit drinking. I think you have entirely quit drinking.
Yes.
What prompted that?
I'm Bruce Figger, a veterinarian living in Sylvia, Kansas, and you're listening to the Vance Crow Podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. I'm glad you're here. My good friend Dave Helland returns to the podcast. Longtime listeners of the podcast probably remember that Dave came on and talked all about construction before. In fact, I've had a lot of my friends say, where's that construction guy, your construction friend? The reality was, when I got done with that podcast, I went to lunch with Dave. That was the first time we'd ever met, and I was horrified to realize just how little of his wisdom and experience that I had tapped into. Dave is actually a mountain climber, a prolific hunter. He has all these thoughts on the internal dialogue in your mind. And so when Dave offered to drive back down to St. Louis and do another podcast, I was elated. What you are about to hear is maybe one of the most wide-ranging podcasts I've ever done, where we talk everything from the internal dialogue to why we've both given up drinking to the taking of a life of an animal and the indifference of nature with you. This is a fantastic conversation that you are going to love. And I assure you, no matter who you are, there are parts of this where Dave's wisdom is going to resonate deeply with you. We're going to get to that interview in just a moment. But first, I wanted to talk about legacy interviews. Listeners of the podcast know that in this studio, I record people telling their life stories so that future generations have the opportunity to know their family stories and history and where they came from. I know that personally, I have had a chance to hear some of the stories that people have talked about that are who they are as a family, what makes them up, what are their values, and I am so grateful to be a part of passing these values on. The story of who we are, what we tell ourselves about what makes us a family, are so critically important. And if your parents are not able to be around your kids, and you want to make sure the things that they taught you are passed down, if you want to make sure that your kids understand why you are who you are because of who they are, then consider having them record a legacy interview. If you're interested in having me sit down with your loved ones to record their family stories, go to legacyinterviews.com. All right, without further ado, let's head to the interview with my good friend, Dave Helland. Dave Helland, welcome back to the podcast.
Glad to be here.
So you are in the high-end home construction industry. How are high-end homes doing right now?
Well, so we do a broad variety of things. So do new custom homes, do a lot of remodeling also, and basically, like I've described to people, I just say that I'm a mercenary. But basically, we'll do anything: small jobs, big jobs, whatever, but niche towards really nice work. So, about the past 5 years, we've always had big projects kind of piled up waiting for us. And now we're worked through all that and don't have big projects in front of us right now, which is good in a way because we can take care of more people. But things are changing a little bit. So obviously interest rates have to have something to do with that, though my clients are, not so worried about that, but I'm sensing some changes. And I know that like the production builders in the area, there's a lot of things changing. They've just got a lot of inventory now.
Have you had to up your prices in order to meet with how much materials cost?
Oh yeah. I mean, the way I do it is basically like I'm an open book on prices. Like when I meet with people, I say, I put together a fee that I'm going to charge for a project once we have a good handle on the scope. And of course, figure out our carpentry labor, but then everything else, they see my costs. They pay what I pay. There's no markup hidden in there or anything. So those have just marched upwards. When we get into these times that seem like a downturn, even though we're not quite there yet, people think, hey, our price is going down. I get asked a lot, like, nothing's going down. Now if you have a homes that are a commodity and the builder's sitting on a bunch of them in a neighborhood, obviously those can be affected that way. But everything that I'm touching is just getting more expensive, just like everything else in the world.
And how are your, I don't know, competitors or other people in the industry doing? Are they all full work? No slowing
People
down?
like me that are just catered towards, upper end stuff, high quality work, got plenty of work, lots of it. But there's trouble coming for, production builders. Don't know how much trouble. Nobody knows. Doesn't seem like it's going to be another 08, 09 kind of a situation, just because the structural triggers for that event don't exist now. But it's definitely going to change. My wife Heather is a realtor, and she's just seeing the mood change out there too. Everything used to get multiple offers, and everybody's fighting to get the houses bought quickly. Goes over asking price, and it's just all changing, and it needs to change. That's just the cycle. Once you get old enough, you've seen it a few times, and you know that this is just the way it has to be.
Yeah, and housing is a weird thing now relative to, like, if you're using the same lens that you saw 2008 with, it's just not going to work.
Right.
Because not only are interest rates totally different than what they were, but like there seems like there isn't enough housing stock, right? So there's a whole bunch of people out there trying to buy, but eventually,
and there's not all the adjustable rate mortgages out there that blew up that first time around, so that structural thing has changed. And then, the weird part right now is just like, okay, so my little sister is 25 years old. She bought a house at 23, and she's in a mortgage that's, 3% or 3 point something. Well, she can't go anywhere. There's no moving up to the next house because she doesn't, of course, have the funds to swing it at 6% or 7%. So that's the glitch in the whole program now. There's not the move up buyers. That's just not happening. So, and I'm not super tied into all of that because I don't, sell 50 houses or 100 houses a year or anything like that. Everything I do is custom. But that seems to be the thing that's kind of, jamming up the wheels of the whole program. There's just people can't get out because the mortgages are too cheap.
I don't have enough like time frame of reference, but it does feel like an unusual time in our economic history in that everybody feels like something's about to hit a tipping point and it never seems to quite hit it. And so is it that we're being propagandized to believe this, or is it that we all know that something should be happening, but somehow they're keeping the whole boat afloat? What's going on there?
I don't know, because you know how it is. Like, all you got to do is get on Twitter or X, and I mean, you can feel pretty dark in just a matter of minutes, right? But then I think, like, how many years have they been predicting that it's all going to collapse? It's like it's going to be every man for himself. And so you can't process things like that, and you really can't even protect from things like that. So, people pretend like you're going to prepare for everything to fall apart. And it's like, man, about all you can do is keep yourself healthy, have some powder dry with some money in the bank, and just hope for the best. Because if it gets really bad, we're all in trouble, but I just don't see, I don't know, even like the idea of high interest rates. I mean, the first house I bought in the year 2000, it was a 7% interest rate. And, my dad was like, oh, wow, what a great opportunity that is, because I mean, everything was coming down from all the way from the 80s. So, and now we're at 6 something, and it's the end times. I think people get used to whatever it is out there, and life just keeps going.
It's definitely true that when older people, so I do all these legacy interviews, and people talk about going through the 70s and 80s with the savings and loan crisis and the amount of interest that they had to pay on things being wildly higher, 20, 22%, like crazy things that people had to do. And, but there seems to be something really that's like hard to see. I mean, inflation is certainly, like, even if it's slowing down, it's still going up.
Right.
And
we're at a time where it's just like the things that we used to trust that were sturdy, government institutions, universities, whatever.
the news.
The news. I mean, the things like you watch the news and people have complained about bias for a long time, but it was never so easy to see the bullshit. Right now, there's a book by Martin Gurri, The Revolt of the Public, and it's really fascinating because he just talks about how over time, governments kept power by controlling the information. They could tell people what they wanted them to know, and they were the source, so people had to believe them. Well, now that's changed, and the truth is everywhere to see, and you can see the government story, and you can see a mainstream story, and then you can get on X and see that was a lie, but they're still acting like they can control it. And so that's where the censorship comes in, and like the desire to, so they can't control it.
And the super weird thing where they say things that they know aren't true, right, and they just keep walking going forward, and like they don't even bat an eye, and it's so bizarre.
It is bizarre. And so like have they always lied? Yes, but it was just never so easy to tell when they were lying, I think. And maybe that's what's messing with our heads, because nothing makes any sense.
Well, I think so many narratives are breaking down that even ones that maybe should be stable are up for grabs. So just last week, I had a woman named Claire Fox on. I really respect it. Like Claire Fox.
Yeah.
And she in there was like, oh, there's two people, Tommy Robinson and Candace Owens, and they're bad people. And the first thing I do when somebody tells me don't listen to somebody is go find them,
see
right?
What they're saying.
And so I wanted to go see what they had to say. And I have to say, like Tommy Robinson, I'd never really paid attention, but I was like, guy's got some interesting points. If those things were happening to me, I'd want to know, how can we stop people from having grooming gangs in my community?
Right.
I go to listen to Candace Owen, and I have no idea if she's right or not, but she is rocking my world with like, oh, you thought you knew who Sigmund Freud was? No, you didn't.
Right.
Oh, you thought you knew how we got into World War II? Well, did you know this and this and this? And they may be wild conspiracy theorists, but the very narratives that I thought these are foundational narratives, everybody knows them to be true. Now those are even shaking. Right. And I'm a man in my 40s. So what happens to a society when the stories that you've told yourself about who we are, about who are the good guys and the bad guys, what did we accomplish, what did we learn from all that starts disintegrating? How are we even a people?
Well, that's the real question. And I think like throughout the T word, the Trump phenomenon is to some degree like, do we value and respect our history and the people that built what we have, or do we think they were all racist, evil capitalists that have created this nightmare that now we've got to solve? And it's like, I think that, we grew up being told that, America was exceptional, and you learn the stories about settling the West and all the hardship that people went through to get us where we are. And I think those stories are important. And I think that you can desire to change something, and you can see, hey, there's this problem right now, and we want to fix it and make life better. But I think it's so important to not just denigrate what everybody before you has done, right? And that's like, it's just like the food production system too. It's like we've got so much food sloshing around now that we can say, you know what, I don't like the way he's doing that, and he's doing that, and they're doing that, and I want to be picky. Great. We should seek to make it better. But it all got to where it is with very sensible systems that led to everybody not having to worry about starving, right? So let's just say, okay, that's why we got here. They're not bad people making all these decisions that got us to this point. Now let's try to do something different. I just think they want to castigate everybody that came before. And I think that that's a real thing that's messing with people's minds. Because how can a kid feel good about anything?
Yeah, I mean, and if you don't have a story, I mean, how we decide that we're a we is based on what is the story that we tell ourselves about who we are and how things work. And if we can't come to agreement, then there is no we. There's just me and you, and totally separate communities. And so, there's some like balance between, you don't want to be, let's create narratives that aren't true, but also like, what happens if all your stories are breaking down? Something is going to come to fill the void, because human beings will not go without having a clear description of where we came from and what our purpose is. And without it, it makes you very vulnerable to soothsayers and
like the Tommy Robinson thing with the England's immigration issues and our immigration issues. It goes right to that. It's like, are we a coherent country with borders, with laws, that it's kind of a club that we decide who gets to come in or not? or is it a free for all? And like, the people in general clearly want it to be some order to the system, right? And now there's arguments on how many immigrants and how few immigrants and what type of people, and those are all great arguments to have. But the idea that it's open and people can show up at the border and just claim amnesty and be let into the country, and our system is so crappy then that we can't deal with that, I think then it further breaks down this idea that we are a coherent country that can be defined. And I just think that's one more thing that's messing with everybody's mind, right? Who are we? What are we doing? And what's the point of it all?
Can you have that without having religion? Can you answer those questions without having faith?
That's a great question. So I grew up with a very religious upbringing. And then I turned away from it. Now I'm getting back. And that's probably just the normal trajectory of a lot of people in life. But I do think that there's something, people, like you just said, seek something to believe in, a higher purpose, a higher meaning. And if you don't have a religious underpinning, something fills it. And that something now appears to just be the wokeism or politics on either side, where it's just like, this is the thing that's going to consume our minds and define our identity, and that we're going to spend all of our time talking and arguing about. And it's not making anybody happier. We know that, right? And so I think religion, I don't think it's 100% necessary, but I think most people need it to make sense of the world.
To me, it seems like there is a massive resurgence of Christianity in the United States. So you have Tucker Carlson, who's the #1 podcast on Spotify and Apple. He's talking about Christianity all the time now. I hear it from all different directions. I mean, Dave Smith, the libertarian guy, was talking on Candace Owens' podcast, and they were talking about God. And there's now an infusion of a language in Christianity that I never heard when I was growing up in small town America, growing up Catholic, which is the talk of demons and like, dark forces and evil. And this is really coming up into our culture in a way that is bewildering to, I don't know if it's like Irish Catholics from small town America just didn't talk about demons, but this was never a part of the language parlance. Are you seeing this?
I'm seeing it too. And so it's a weird thing happening where, like, so Tucker Carlson, for example, he's bringing on and giving a platform to like some bad guys, like the Andrew Tates of the world.
Now we're going to have to go listen to Andrew Tate.
Right. But so the crazy part is, so they're talking about Christianity, which is good. And the message that comes through some of these things, like that Andrew Tate said in an interview with Tucker Carlson, was like, it was amazing. It was one of the most amazing interviews I've ever listened to. Just talking about masculinity and standing up for yourself and your family and your country, and how it's critical in any culture that men are empowered. And once you can break the men, you can break the culture. And so this is really fascinating. So there's bad people saying really powerful things that are good and bringing Christianity into the conversation. My mind cannot handle it because you can't compartmentalize them. So I'm hearing all the same things you're hearing, and I'm encouraged on one hand, I'm troubled on another hand. So I'm just trying to make sense of it all.
Well, you said Andrew Tate, bad person. You said it multiple times there. Why do you say that?
Oh, he's got, just a lot of, so is he in Romania, and he's, getting prosecuted now for sex trafficking is what it was. And so, he had like grooming girls for OnlyFans pages and then taking the money and doing all that stuff. If you look at some of his old stuff, it's really, really horrifying. Now, he could have changed, but he also, he's got this, you mix the religion and then the pursuit for material wealth, and it just gets kind of ugly, even though there's good messages in there. I don't know. It's just, these are such imperfect people that are being put in front of us as like this counter counterculture against the wokeism that it's hard to find something you really can get behind fully with a lot of these people. It's just like a Trump thing, you know what I mean? He's fighting on one side, but like, my God, the
Yeah, and
things that he says and the things that he like, terrible.
in order to cheer for somebody, you have to like just kind of close one eye or look, not pay attention to it, or be like, well, that was the way they were, but now they're not that way.
Yeah, and then I've come to realize like we're all guilty of this. Like once you decide like one of these people is kind of generally has the idea that you have for the world, then the things they say just kind of wash over you like a cool breeze, and you don't even pay any attention to it. But then other people on the other side are like picking out each thing. So what about this? What about this? What about this? And you're like, well, you got to look at the whole picture. Well, that's what a good leader should be able to articulate, a vision that it can actually stand behind everything that they say.
It's been weird, particularly in the conservative world. I don't know about the left world, but in the conservative world, there have been these heroes that have run way up and become really important and then somehow fallen off. So, I mean, Jordan Peterson would be a great example. The run up to that, where he went from, total obscurity to interesting guy to watch, to somebody they tried to cancel, to the most important public intellectual in the Western world, to benzodiazepine addiction, and then coming back up, but being in a different format.
Kind of weird now. Like he's just is so angry. Like if you look at his old videos when he was a professor, they're wonderful stuff, powerful, but he seems like a guy that's just kind of become a victim of his own, I don't know, his own importance. He got elevated too much, and then that changed him. It just seems like to me. But you read his books. God, his books are so deep; they'll turn your brain inside out. But there's good stuff in there.
Yeah, I get to meet him before he became like really famous. I went to his
when
house
you got him at the
Farm Bureau.
Yeah.
But that was my first experience with being canceled. There's something about the speed with which people become famous. It's like not stable.
Yeah.
And Rob Long, who I had on the podcast not long ago, he had something to say that keeps ringing around in my head. He's like, I don't really want to listen to or read anything that somebody didn't hammer on for weeks or months or years and then read it. Like, I want them to have written it down and then ripped it apart and written it again. And only then do I want to put those distilled ideas in my head. And when I think about these people that are really alluring as mob leaders, whether they're Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan, anybody, they're very clever people, but they're clever in a very fast and somewhat fragile way. And it's probably a good rule of thumb to be like, maybe I should only be reading things that have been distilled over a long period of time.
Well, and then that touches on the reading of books, like a book that's on paper that it was written a high quality work that's been around for a long time, has stood the test of time. Like there's value in bringing that stuff into your mind, right? But that's so much harder. It's so much harder than just scrolling through. And so,
you don't get the ooh, what's going on? Right. Like, ooh, that feels good.
And just the draw that phone has to you when it's just even on, right? It's like it's got to be off or in another room, or else, like for me, reading is hard. I just gotta say I'm not touching this. It is away from me, and I'm reading a book, and then you can get the focus you need. And I think that's just so. To your point, everything's happening so fast, and there's so much content, and we're really taking in way too much. Like, what's the right amount of news and information or commentary on X to take in? Like, you want to know what's going on, you can't just be that first blast. You got to then have some context around it, but then somewhere there's a line that you cross where it's like you got in too deep, you took in too much, and now you're more confused than when you started. So stopping at that sweet spot is the key, but I don't know how you do it.
And I don't know that there really is that sweet spot, because doing the Ag Tribes report now once a week, I'm trying to put together news stories and saying, all right, what's really going on here? And now I've hit the point where you're starting to do a story on milk pricing, right? And you're like, oh, this is going to be simple. How much milk does the farmer produce, and what price are producers willing to pay for it? oh no, wait, actually, it's way more complicated than that. They're regulated, and the government chooses how much money the producer owes the milk farmer based on, did you produce cheese or whey protein or skim milk? Like, okay, well, where did this system come from? And you start falling down into how complicated any one individual story is, that trying to articulate that to an audience, which is just a game of telephone. So my description of what's going on is bullshit, because it would take years to understand this whole system. And then somebody hears it on my podcast and tries to relay that into the rest of their world. Like, it's a never-ending thing of abstraction upon abstraction upon abstraction.
And it's impossible. There's another book, The Paradox of Choice.
Oh,
you
yeah,
read that one?
Yeah.
We're talking about choices are supposed to make you happy, right? But then what it required, back when there was the phone company and you paid a phone bill, you didn't have to research anything. It's just like you get a phone and you're paying these people once a month. Well, now there's so many different choices, which requires expertise and all these things. So now you're taking up your bandwidth trying to learn about all these different things, right? And so we do that for our media. Well, you can't do it. So what do? You have to then default to some of the bigger names. I'm gonna listen to what this guy says, and that guy might be a guy on X, or he might be a politician, and then that's, I think, where too many of these things are then packaged up together in this political persona that I just said, where we were saying, well, I kind of know that this guy kind of wants what I want, so I'm not going to pay attention to the details of this, this, and this. And then now we're being led around by demagogues all the time, because we really don't even know what they're doing. And are they even changing anything? Nothing seems to change. Like no matter what administration we've got the same things we're fighting about. So what does that mean? And this is why we're all so crazy, because we think you can change it, but nothing ever changes. And where does that lead us then? Why care at all?
Yeah, and what is there to know or believe in?
Right.
Well, one thing that's changed for both you and I is that both of us have, I don't know about you, I've almost entirely quit drinking. I think you have entirely quit drinking.
Yes.
What prompted that?
So I've been, for years, just like, I'm gonna slow down, and so you slow down for a little while, but then you got a social event, you're with friends doing this and doing that, and all the habits kick in, and you just.
And when you say slow down, what do you mean?
Slow down on drinking. So, when you drink, it sneaks up on you. So back, you start drinking in college, let's say, and it's just for fun. Well, then it's, you start drinking just in the evening, just having a drink to relax. And then pretty soon you're having two, and then it gets to be, you're drinking every day, and you're drinking more at social events. So it's just a lot. So from a health aspect alone, you think like, well, this is bad. And so I'm going to try not to do that. First, way back, I tried to do it just for money. Like I'm not going to spend money on that. That's stupid. But then I just kept falling into drinking too much at events. So then I had the wise idea, this was somewhere in my 20s, that, drink too much at these events. Maybe I just need to drink more often.
Yeah.
And then it won't be so. That seemed like a good plan. Well, that didn't work. And so I just drank more often, and then still drank too much when I got together socially. And
when you say drink too much, you mean you wake up the next day and you're like, why did I say that?
Yeah, you don't feel good. And then that, what really got me is, so you're out late, you have drinks, you have a lot of fun, you wake up the next day and you just like, ooh, I don't feel very good about that. So then what do? You talk to the people that you were, hey, well, it was a good time last night. And you just try to feel everybody out and see if you did damage. And then you cover yourself with the laughter and the good stories, and then everything's fine again, right? But there was just kind of an anxiety it just developed in me that just never went away. So that was the first piece. And then the health aspect. You just started getting into fitness and health. And I remember talking to a guy who was just a beast, an absolute specimen of fitness. And he didn't want to take aspirin, didn't want to take anything but he drank a lot. And I thought, so that doesn't even make any sense to me, right? It's inconsistent. Even though the guy looked great, I'm like, well, this can't be that good. And then right about that time, Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast, had a podcast, talked about on the cellular level what happens when you drink alcohol. And it's an unavoidable thing. This is actually happening to you. And then talked about the anxiety that comes from drinking, even moderate drinking that comes. And I'm like, I was listening to him like, yeah, all of those things. So that, and then had a son at 15 at the time. And I just thought, how do I tell him that he shouldn't when I'm drinking? So basically, I just decided to quit. And that was 2 full years ago. And yeah, for the first year and a half, you can ask my wife, I complained about it like almost all the time. I mean, it was my choice, but I was still just mad about it because there was so much of my life was associated with alcohol. Just all the fun things, every event. And
you begin to find out that you didn't realize it's very difficult to distinguish which events were fun or which ones weren't based on alcohol, but you can't see that until you've had a long time away from it.
Well, and all of the social stuff and fond memories, but you take away the alcohol and it's like, you can't just be talking to people for 4 and 5 hours. You can't do it. You can't sustain it. You realize
you can't. I can't.
In a social setting, like it's just not that interesting, And so you realize that so that was to me an awareness. Like, okay, I feel differently now. This is not as great as it once was, and so alcohol just kind of masked what was valuable and what was bringing value. It made everything seem valuable. But it was really the alcohol that I was seeking. And so now, do less, but it's just higher value stuff,
For me, I quit drinking, I don't know, about 2 years ago. I think you and I were about the same timeline the last time we talked. And there's a couple of times when I've had drinks. It's almost exclusively been when I'm with older guys, like my father-in-law or whatever. And the next day I wake up and I'm like, I feel horrible. And that sense of anxiety where you're like, what did I say? Did I do something foolish? And you start getting further and further away from that. And you're like, I don't have to wake up every Sunday morning and be like, oh man, why did I do that? Which I had for decades at that point. Right. And you start being like, man, life is a lot better. I didn't have it's not hard for me to not drink. That was but there are other vices that I took on as soon as I cut alcohol out, right? And now I'm like shoveling ice cream in my face and eating crackers till no end.
And if you could just quit and not have it be a thing, that would be great. But I just loved it too much, and because all of the behaviors that I connected with it, one by one, they had to be broken. And then I've got really good friends, and at first it's weird. They're like, nobody knows what to do with you for a little while because you're the guy that's changed. But now it's just what it is, and it's fine.
This is another thing, just like Christianity that's coming up. Giving up alcohol has definitely increased in volume. There is a lot more men, I think, that are quitting drinking than ever were 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I just, I wonder what's driving that. 2020 just kind of blew up the alcohol. I don't know if you've seen the stats. I don't remember the numbers, but the alcohol consumption in the country in 2020, it's like off the charts.
Really?
It exploded. And because everybody's home.
Yeah, that was the first time I'd ever had a friend call me during the day as an adult being drunk. And being like, whoa, what's going on here, right? Like,
and so, I don't know if that just was a blow off top of the whole cycle of everything, and people start looking around and like, got to make a change. And once a few more people are saying that and they're talking to each other, then that drives a movement. But, it just takes up a lot of bandwidth of your life, just chasing the social events that are related to alcohol. And so Heather and I both, were done with that and glad to be done with it, though I still miss it. So
there are drinks I like. That I'd love to have a good, scotch or a whiskey or something like that. But outside of that, but I also discovered that the biggest reason alcohol impacted me is that it impacted my sleep. And if I don't have to have a lot of sleep. I need about 6.5 hours.
High quality.
But it's got to be high quality. And if I've messed it up by imbibing or smoking or doing anything, I would even say eating junk food. Now I've come to the realization, now that I've gotten my arms around that that having a bowl of ice cream at night impacts how deeply I sleep, which has really been surprising to me.
Isn't it? I think it's great when you get older and like you can actually say to people how sleep is important to you. Remember, for so many years, you're just like, oh, I don't need any sleep, and you're just an idiot when you don't get sleep. And my friends and I was just talking about this the other day. For all of our hunting trips and everything, we drive all night, and then get there, and you think you're going to be able to just go. Well, everybody's grouchy, angry at each other, angry at the world because we're tired, right? And so now, good night's sleep on the front end is built into the plans.
What's a good night's sleep for you?
So go to bed at 9, out of bed at 4:30, a little bit of reading when I get to bed. So you're talking, alarm goes off at 4. I'm a snoozer. Haven't worked out the get up like that. Yeah, so I lose
bad people.
So I lose a half. So I lose a half hour on the tail end. So 6.5 high quality hours in there is good for me. But if I get like interrupted sleep, it's like it goes. I don't know. Somehow you lose a little sleep in the middle of the night, and that has a supersized effect on me. So yeah, I'm about the same as you.
Yeah, sleep is one of those things that one of the questions I asked during legacy interviews is, if you could go back in your life and give this person some advice, what would it be? And I heard this old woman say, I tell them how important sleep is. That's what I would have told her. And you're like, actually, that's probably the best advice. If I could go convince myself all these years, like, focus on sleep, there's a whole bunch of problems that would have worked their way out on their own.
First of all, you're not up late enough to get yourself into to do anything stupid. Then. That's the other thing, And those nights where you're just like staying up, watching the same dumb movie, and that was another thing that alcohol did. It just kept me up later. You just kind of stay up, just doing something stupid. So, yeah, so a lot of people say, like, well, when I was younger, I could recover better, right? And like, okay, maybe there's some truth to that. But I also just think when you're older, you know what feeling good is. And you want to feel good. And so like when you don't feel good, you know it. And then you can identify the reason why you don't. When you're younger, I think it's just all, you're just not focusing in on all those things. And you're living your lives and you're thinking you can stay up till 2 and be up at 6 and feel good. And so are we actually that much more resilient for a lack of sleep when we're 20, or do we just know what works now and we want to implement our plan? I think that's what it is personally.
Living your lies is one that, as soon as you say that, I'm like, ooh, I did a lot of living lies in when you're 20s, and you're like, you can so easily lie to yourself and be like, nah, that's not that big of a deal. This isn't going to hurt me. And the whole time you're doing it.
And that's the thing, everybody knows, whether it's diet and exercise or whatever, you know what you need to do. It is not a secret. Now we'll read a book and like, oh, I get my new motivation and these are great points. And then you get on a program, you do all these things, but everybody knows what they need to do, but it's so freaking hard to do it. And so you seek these other things just to, I don't know, just add a little bit of weight on the scale, hopefully tipping you in the right direction.
Well, I think that what you're supposed to do, it comes down to that dialogue in your brain, right? That like, I need to get up. No, you don't. You can go back to sleep. It might be better for you to get more rest now instead. Or you hurt your toe and you don't want to hurt it more by going out and going for a jog. Do you have that inner voice that you talk with?
Oh yeah, my inner voice is and I end up being I say a lot of harsh things to myself, which they say is bad, but it's like sometimes I got to beat down, like, hey, no, you idiot, don't be weak. You just gotta, it is really, really hard to do the things that you're supposed to do every day. I think that's the first thing that people just, if you're trying to into self-improvement, you just got to accept that. Like, it is hard. It is not complicated, but it is very, very difficult. And so those two things often don't go together, right? But so because it's so difficult, then we seek all these complicated solutions. Just look at like workout programs that people get into, like right off the streets. We're going to get you in a 60-day program and you're going to, do this, and this. And people can just through force of will do that for a short period of time, but you can't sustain that, right? And so you got to find something that like is something that fires you up, that you actually look forward to do, and then you can get some results reasonably quickly, but then just ease into it. But like the whole culture of, if you tell people like, hey, don't expect anything for the first year, nobody wants to get started in that, right?
It's
It
going
could
to
be dead in a year.
A year down the path.
Right.
So one of the things that my wife and I don't fight very often,
Uh-huh.
but even this morning, as I was walking out the door, we had a little dust up and like, I was really frustrated and I left afterwards and I'm driving to work and I'm like, why is this difficult? And really at the core of the disagreement came down to, she was checking that the answer that I gave to her before was the answer I still wanted, right? So she had asked me a question before. We had talked all our way through it. I had given her an answer and she's like, do you still want this answer? Now, for me, if somebody opens up a question and says, do you still want this? It means they want something else. And so they're trying to convince me of it.
Creates doubt.
But my wife's actually not that way. If I think about my wife, she can bring up a question, explore it again, and then set it down and then explore it again. It's just the way that in her nature. Me, the way that I stay on the path of the righteous and good and narrow is I make a decision and then I don't ever deviate. Because if I deviate, now I'm way over here. I'm going to go down the wrong path. And if I have to have that dialogue with my inner self, my inner bitch, whatever that is, wins a lot of the time. And so I make decisions and then I don't fuck with those decisions.
Yeah, because and there's some like that revisiting stuff creates doubt. Like so with customers or with clients, like they'll choose a countertop, and then like countertop company, we've chosen, said this is our selection, and then somebody fires something back. Just confirming that this is your selection. That opens up chaos because, like, first of all, it's like, I don't know, was that our selection? Nobody can remember. This was like 3 months ago and we decided. And so then I'm obligated then to go to the client, like, okay, I'm just making sure this is what you want. And then it's like, well, yeah, we think so. But then there's doubt comes in, and what was certain is now doubt. And I tell people, like, I mean, obviously there has to be a long process to get everything just right. But once you've decided, if you put in the legwork on the front end, decide and forget about it. And it will work out. Now, if you're making quick decisions and not thinking about it, bad things can happen. But people almost never regret what they've chosen if they engage in a genuine process of discovery, right? But then, once that's done, just be done with it. Move on.
Well, I think of this just like the snooze bar, right? Like I cannot do snooze. I have to make a decision. I will be out of bed at this time.
You get up just like that?
Oh, yeah. No question. In fact, I don't even set an
envy
alarm. In fact, setting an alarm only gives me more anxiety. If I set an alarm, I'll wake up throughout the night to be like, is that alarm about to go off? I wouldn't want to. I'm middle child of 7, so you didn't want to disturb anybody else. Otherwise, you'd be a pariah. So I'm very much like, if I make a decision, then I just execute on that decision. And anytime I start making deals with myself, I always choose the easier, like, bullshit option that allows me to do something dumb. And so I just don't negotiate
because
with
that's what our brain is always doing. It's like we talked about before. It's trying to get you to do the easy thing. And why wouldn't it? Because it's easier, but it's not. It's never right. It's always wrong. It's always the wrong thing. And I'll find myself, I'm gonna get up and run, and then like, ooh, I got some work to do, and God, I don't know if I got time.
Wouldn't it be great if I had that time to work on
and
other
I'll feel
things?
great. And then when I'll have all my stuff done, and then I'll go out for my run, and I'll be But then 5 o'clock. Ooh, gosh, should I run tonight? I don't know. I guess I lifted yesterday. Maybe I need a rest day. It's just endless. And like, to me, the only way around that is a plan. And like, you make your plan. And you gotta work the plan, and now you can't always, I mean, when you got kids and you got things change, so you can't get weird about it. But you got to know the difference when it's an actual, when you got a good reason to change the plan and not just some weakness, right? And that's the whole key to everything.
Well, so you're a mountain climber, and we talked a little bit about this the last time, but you must spend quite a bit of time in your own head while you're climbing a mountain.
Yeah, a lot. And that's the best part of it. But so like you get, there's just all these different phases. So every mountain climb, there's a big approach. Like my son Drake and I just went out to the Beartooth Wilderness in Montana to do Granite Peak. And we did this Huckleberry Creek approach is what it's called. And it's through the forest and these winding trails. And they're not like good trails. They're just kind of footpaths through the forest. And it was, I think it was 9 or 10 miles in, I forget, to where we camped. So that approach is kind of this, it's like you want to climb the mountain, but you got to get through this approach. So it's kind of just a necessary hoop to jump through. And that whole time you're just thinking ahead to tomorrow, right? Then you get to your camp and you're going to do your summit day. And that's when things get a lot more real. And you're just thinking, what's the weather going to be like? What's our plan? What time do we get up in the morning? How long? And you never know what the hell's going on either. Like how many hours it's going to take to get to the summit. You're just guessing. You go on some guidebook and try to find out what somebody else said. And so then summit day is, you start early and it's really difficult and you're just hating life because it takes so many hours to get up to the part that you really want to do. And that's the summit. And so while you're grinding through that is when like your mind starts to really attack you. And, it just says like, what are you doing? You should stop, all those things, because it wants the easy way out. But then if you can just get through that and you just go on one foot in front of the other, then that's when you get in this beautiful state of mind where you're just going. There's no thoughts or anything. So now,
why do you say that's beautiful?
Because how many times do you get really all you're thinking about is there's no actual thoughts. It's just your body moving forward. And like, you're not worried about your working. You're not worried about your family. You're not worried about, what you're doing tomorrow. You're not worrying about anything other than like right now, because it's so uncomfortable that you can't dwell on how uncomfortable it is. You just got to think about, I always just think about like my whole body, my feet and my ankles, my knees and all the way up and just everything working together. And you just get in this beautiful flow and it's just really cool. And then, if you do that long enough, you get that summit and the feeling of that is just amazing. And like shortly before we summit, when you know that you're going to make it, when you just know, because you always had doubt all the way up until when and that's the moment that it just...
Because a snowstorm might come up or
you don't know if you can handle it. You don't know. Yeah. Thunderstorms, when you're in the mountains in the summertime, thunderstorms come up in the afternoon. It's really, really dangerous. This one that Drake and I just did, it was, fairly technical top, we're climbing with ropes up the last several 100 feet and you've never been there before. You don't really know how you're supposed to do it. It's scary. Right. And, so you just don't know. You don't know if you're going to hack it. And then eventually once you know for sure, just that feeling is irreplaceable. And then you get the summit and then you come back down. And then you always have a long, grueling descent. And the descent when you're mountain climbing is actually the most dangerous. I think it's like 80% of the injuries and deaths climbing come on the descent because you've burned up all your energy. And a lot of times people think, oh, the climb is over, right? Because I've made it to the top. Well, you got to get back down. And now gravity is working against you with falls or more likely stepping down. But so we had this super long summit day on this last one. And my son Drake, who was 17, he had never had a long day like this. And we were out, I think we were 16 hours into the day and it was dark. And we still had several hours back through these massive boulder fields, very treacherous, just dangerous terrain. And I said, how are you doing? And he's like, I'm just starting to shut down. And I said, well, we can stay out here. We had food, we had, waterproof gear. We could stay out here. We'd be fine. And he's like, I don't want to stay out here. I said, we got to get back. It's your only choice then. And I said, the way you're feeling right now, in normal life, you got 0 to 10 fatigue scale, right? I said, you're way past 10. Now you're in a zone you've never been in before. And it can't be measured. And it has no context, but now you're just like muscle and bone and blood and you're moving forward. And that's all you do. And that's all you think about. And I said, and here's what I promise you, you will never forget this day for the rest of your life. So we had another 3 hours, and he made it back, and we're back at the tent at 1:30 a.m. and we're feeling great. We're eating and we're happy and we're laughing. And that's the weird part. Like, you didn't have any energy, but you did. You just got to access it. And that's the thing I love about mountain climbing. I end up digging deeper to find something that you don't get to in normal life.
I really like that concept of you know, if you were in your regular life, you already crossed 10 and that would have put you in bed and everybody would have been like, oh, he's really tired.
He's
And just
tired,
give him
yeah.
a break. But you're way past that and you still have more to go.
Yeah. And then so that's this fascinating part. So I told him, like, you know, so then you take that back to your normal life. Now, I'm not saying that you can always have this broad-minded context in normal life. You know, sometimes you just get crazy, but are you really that tired? Are you really to the point where you can't go on any further? Or is it just your emotional state is such that you can't access that energy? And I just think it's just a great thing to fall back on at times, to just know that, you know what, it's not really as dire as you think it is right now. You got more. You just got to figure out how to get it.
In regular life, I think one of the things that I struggle with the most in my 40s is I have so many things to do. I don't always know what to do. And I find, like, I wake myself up being like, oh, you just kind of walked around in a circle for the last hour and a half. Like, that's not good.
Yeah.
But like when you're on a path, you're climbing a mountain, you know, that's the top of the mountain. I'm going to keep going in that direction until I get there. And that's the way back to camp.
Yeah.
But regular life doesn't afford such a clear path.
No, it's much more complicated. And that's like, you boil down when you're in the mountains, it's just this beautiful simplicity where, I mean, really all you're thinking about where you're going, and then water, the food you have, you know, are you dry? Are you wet? You know, just those kind of just basic existence. And you realize, like, you just don't, in those moments, you don't need anything else, nor could you accommodate anything else. And so just to get out of the world in all of its distraction, I just think those wilderness trips in general, and climbing specifically, is just so good for people.
What I hear you describing that you did with your son is kind of a summer climb up a mountain, maybe a big one, but that's not, you've got ice spikes on and you're like doing an axe up. Do you do that kind of mountain climbing?
Yeah, I've done a lot of it. I mean, I've climbed the Matterhorn and in Switzerland, and Mont Blanc in France, and climbed in Ecuador and Argentina. And did Denali, summited Denali in 2019. And then, so all of these different skills come into play on the bigger mountains, you know, the more complicated climbs, you know, the ones that you see that are popular and publicized are, the mountains are commercialized. And so now that's still great, and people are putting forth effort and doing super, super hard things. But then the deeper you get into it and the more skills you build, just the less commercialized and more isolated you can get. And that's super sweet. So, you know, Denali's a big mountain that's commercialized on the standard route, but on the West Buttress route. But we did this West Rib route, which is a little different. So we were able to be alone on Denali. And so, I just trying to go everywhere I can. I'm trying to build all the skills necessary to do these more complex climbs. And that does not necessarily mean big mountains that anybody's heard of before.
Are all mountains climbable?
There are some mountains that are crumbly enough, like the glaciers have receded enough, like on one side of it, that it's just crumbly and just like unclimbable. But, and I think every mountain can be climbed. It just takes more, you know, has human skill, and knowledge keeps expanding. You know, what was impossible 30 years ago now, like a lot of people can do, and it's happening in climbing too. So basically there's people climbing everything.
And when you think about the next mountain to climb, what is it that makes you choose this one rather than that one?
Well, so depends on, like, okay, if the sun's coming with, we're going to do Rainier next summer. Okay. But then I also want to go back to Switzerland, and we're going to climb the Eiger next, hopefully next summer also. And so, the Eiger is just this mountain that's super famous, and it's just got this just evil looking north face that is super scary, and it's part of climbing lore. So I'm going to climb that one, and then, but it all depends. Like you go to Europe, and you got Europe's crazy because like the mountains are so easily accessible because they've got all these telefreaks, the chairlifts. So you'll be like down in Chamonix, and somebody, sipping wine and having a nice dinner, and then 90 minutes later you're up on a glacier in full alpine conditions. So it's like super accessible. So you can stay there. You go up and climb a lot of these peaks, just one day up and down, and then you just can hit a bunch of them in the area, and you can have like everything from easy walk-ups to these like super crazy things that are way beyond my capacity. So, so there's that experience, and then there's the big expeditions. And the big expeditions would be like a Denali or Aconcagua in Argentina, where you're out there for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks. And I like the expeditions because it's like time changes. You're like, there's rest days, because basically you climb up to a camp, cache gear, come back down, sleep here. Then the next day you move up to the next camp, stay there. And so you basically climb the mountain twice just to acclimate. But the time you spend, it's just like time gets weird because you're spending like all day doing nothing at times, like literally nothing, just resting, laying in a tent, stretching, reading a book. And on Denali, I was in a tent for 3.5 days for a snowstorm, and we were just stuck in there for 3.5 days, 3 of us. And you'd think that would make you insane, but it went by pretty quickly. So there's just some beautiful things about both of those. Lots of climbing on short climbs, or just a long stretched out expedition experience. And I just like them both.
And when you think about your technical ability getting better at mountain climbing, you presumably have to do things you haven't done before. How do you keep going without going too far?
Guides. I go with guides. And so I've got 2 different guides that I go with, and they're friends now. And, they're experts. And so you're paying them to be your friend to some degree, and to just show you the ropes. And then you gain experience with this person who you have total trust in. And then you strike out on your own on something simpler than that, and just build, because there's no substitute for just doing it alone to have the skills built. So, and I'm starting late enough in life. I'll never be an expert at it, but I'm trying to do it as much as I can and learn as much as I can.
So we went to what's it, Angel's Head in Bryce Canyon, right? Like,
yeah.
I tried to tell my wife as we were walking up, like, I'm not super comfortable with heights. Like, I've done mountain climbing before, but I've done a couple 14ers in Colorado, but like the path was relatively like there was plenty of space. I didn't have to look over an edge and see like, oh, there you're dropping forever. You'll know you're going to die before you're dead. And it holds no allure to me to be in a spot where you can like drop a rock off and it just falls and falls and falls.
And see, and I love that feeling of exposure. Now it takes some, you got to build the tolerance to it, right? But I just love that feeling where you're secure. They call it low risk, high consequence, where it's like, I'm secure, I'm standing here, I got a hold of it, I'm fine. But if you slipped and fell, you're dead. Or
if somebody comes by and bumps you, like I think I had an older brother that gave me enough fear. Like I have like an ever present fear that like I'm just gonna get nudged and like you're gone.
So I've got a video from a 360-degree camera on a helmet on the summit of the Matterhorn. And it's this knife edge ridge like that. And you're walking. And now those 360s make it look a little more aggressive than it actually is. Like it falls off to the end of the earth. And you see us like stepping around people who are coming off the summit. It's wild. Yeah, it's on my YouTube page. And it is wild. And so and that was one, the Matterhorn, so this was back in 2017. I was scared out of my mind before, like the day before I was almost in tears by myself, just like I don't think I can do it. I don't think I can do it. I didn't know because I knew that knife edge was up at the summit, and it's basically you fall, you die kind of exposure the whole way. And then we just did it, and it was great. And that was like this moment where it's, to have such fear and then like have it work out. Like you can't not learn something from that.
I mean, I'm sure you could learn things from him, but there are very few things that give me crippling fear. And
Well,
that one gives me crippling fear.
And that's normal. And I'll never forget the guy that I first started climbing with. So we were going to go climb the Leaning Tower out in Yosemite, and it's just big rock face that leans back at you. And it was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And then I'm just working through it, and we're tied into the rope, and you realize like it's just the rope that's going to keep me safe, right? And I said that to him, and he looked at me and said, "That's climbing." And now I've actually said that to other people because you're like, "Oh my God, you trust that rope?" Yes, you have to. That's all you got. If you don't trust the rope, then you can't be climbing. And so, where does that trust come from? Just, I guess, everybody else trusts it. And so, like, we were coming down Granite Peak in Montana, and there's these rappel stations where it's just like a nylon strap that like hooked around a rock, and it's the size of your pinky, and it's like somebody's left it there, guides presumably, and like that's what you got to hook into and rappel down. And Drake is like, I mean, is that going to hold us?
Do you know the guy? Did he tie the knot
and
right?
You're just like, I believe it will hold us. And it's and that's obviously there's things that are tattered or ripped and you can't trust it, but it's just weird. You end up just having this intuitive sense of like, yeah, that'll hold. But you got to be right. And that's the other beautiful thing about climbing is like just this ultimate personal responsibility. Like it's really not dangerous if you don't make a mistake. But if you make a mistake, you got big problems. And I guess I like that.
Yeah, there's something deeply like trusting yourself about all of this and trusting the people that you're next to. Because
you're out there like in the mountains, like the whole idea they're indifferent, right? Like the mountains don't care if you fall or if you don't fall. They're just being mountains. And there's just something that, I don't know, there's just something, we have so much safety built around us in our normal life. And I guess there's just, to me, some value in just going out, having all that stripped away. But
when you have, like, I think there's like a profound realization that most men should learn. I don't know if women need to learn it or not. I'm not a woman. But for me, I remember going surfing in waves that were way bigger than I should have been in. And I'm on this wave and like, I realize like, if I fall off of this, I will die. There's very little chance that I'll be able to swim back to shore. And you realize like, well, this ocean wave can't be pleaded with. Like, I can't say like, oh, please don't hurt me. There's no one to help me. It's just me out in nature. And that realization humbles you in a way where you're like, oh, nature doesn't actually care about me. Like it's totally indifferent. And that indifference is like truly horrifying if you think about it. Cause it's like, whether you're here or not, you'll be gone and it will continue in whatever form it's in. And that's something that like, when you have that realization, you're maybe one with the universe in a deeper way.
Yeah. And it's interesting. You mentioned if women feel that, and I guess I'm sure I know there are some women that seek that adventure, but it seems to be so inherent in young males. I mean, that's why they do such stupid stuff, right? But so to be able to harness that stupid in something that where skill and care and knowledge can protect you from the consequences, but you're still taking these risks. Like it's this perfect mix. And so maybe if there was more outlets like that, maybe kids would do less dumb stuff. I don't know. Maybe not.
Would you go back to your 20s if you couldn't bring your wisdom with you?
Man, that's a tough one. I don't know. 20s were pretty. Here's what I think about my 20s. I didn't realize how good being in my 20s were when I was in my 20s. You know what I mean? Like I just kind of let that slide by and kind of ball is just stress, the young man stress, just trying to figure out like,
Yeah.
oh my God, how am I going to get what I want kind of a thing.
What am I going to grow up to be?
Right. Now, I don't look back on my 20s and long for them, nor do I my 30s and really even my 40s now. So every decade has gotten better for me. I suppose just to get more years, I'd probably go back. But if just to be a dipshit again, I don't know.
I feel
if I
that same
would.
way. Like my wife has like very much a nostalgia that I'm always afraid of. Not about her 20s, but like our kids are growing up and are we going to miss that? And it's just not something that I'm used to. And I think a lot about like, well, if I could go back to my 20s, not being able to change what I know. Because if you could go back to your 20s and be as wise as you are in your 40s or 50s, God. You just kill it. You would,
it'd be dangerous.
But like if you had to go back and like to me, it'd be like, I don't know, I'd be rolling the dice again. I'm not so sure I'd arrive here twice.
Yeah.
Right. Like
it takes a lot of luck.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of luck. And I said being a dipshit, and obviously there's a lot of people in their 20s that are doing great things. And I did some good things in my 20s, but the way my brain worked and the things that I just like, how did I get those habits built in my 20s? Like, that was just destructive things.
Alcohol being one of those ones that's like a synthetic form of adventure,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where you can convince yourself. I mean, I remember my buddies and we were living in Northern California, and we would go out to a bar and stay out there till 2 a.m. playing darts and trying to catch them out of the air, right? Well, it's stupid, right? But like to a 20-year-old that's drinking and trying to impress girls, like this is like a lot of fun and an adventure, but like all those nights blended together and didn't really amount to much.
Think of all the problems that could get solved if the girls held the young men to higher standards.
Yeah. They did think it was pretty cool if you could grab a dart out of the air.
Cool.
We called it Kill Dart. It was a pretty fun game. Not everybody would play. You'd sort everybody out that way.
And then you'd do the lawn darts after that.
Oh, man. I'm so glad lawn darts weren't around when I was a kid, because I'd have definitely killed somebody. So when we were talking before, you're like, I'm not really an expert in climbing. The thing I have an expertise in probably is hunting. Yeah. When did you pick that up?
Well, so my dad didn't hunt or anything like that. I had my cousin Steve invited me to go hunting with him when I was 14. And for whatever reason, it just grabbed a hold of me. I loved it, and I had almost no success for the first maybe 3 years or 4 years, even just muddling through. And Steve trying to learn how to hunt with nobody teaching us. And
what were you using for a gun?
So shooting pheasants and ducks with a shotgun, and then we started. In Iowa, we don't have rifle hunting for deer; it's shotguns with slugs. So I think the first year I went deer hunting, I didn't see a deer. The second year I saw a deer, but didn't have a shot. The third year I had a shot and missed. And then I think maybe the fourth year I finally got one. And then I started bow hunting when I was maybe 22 or something like that. But it was really interesting because I worked on a farm in junior high and high school with my great uncle and my dad's cousins. And so I was like had that kind of nature influence as far as farming, but didn't really have an interest in nature other than that. Started hunting, and then that just blossomed into just a passion for love of nature of all kinds, right? And then other really interesting aspect of hunting that has been great for my life is just my friends in college were my hunting friends, and that has kept us together all these years. Get together and deer hunt and turkey hunt every year. And without that, those friendships, you'd probably still have friends, but without that activity to get you together, it seems impossible to maintain.
So for somebody that's never taken the life of an animal larger than an insect, what's that like?
Well, it's really interesting. And I'll say that, the first time I did it, I remember it really bothered me. Like, so I think I shot a squirrel when I was 15 or something like that. It really bothered me. But then you got over it pretty quick just because you're excited about doing it again. Kind of make sense of that. And then, there is a phase that a lot of people go through in hunting where it's kind of a bloodthirsty phase. There's like these definite phases of the hunting trajectory and where you're just trying to get stuff. And that's not good. And there's not enough reverence for what you're doing. But then as you just take in more of it, and over the years, I just realized how significant that was. So I was in Colorado one time, and my buddy Matt had just shot an elk with his bow, and we were out there on the mountain gutting it and cutting it into pieces. And I looked at him. I said, "This is fucking serious. We should never forget it." And that's just at that moment, like, look at us. Covered with blood, and we're cutting an animal apart, and we're going to carry all these pieces off the mountain, and then we're going to eat it. Like, holy, this is wild. But what a great feeling that is. I remember driving away from that mountain and looking back and just thinking, like, we just went in there and we got 2 elk and carried them out, and here we are. And this is like this amazing feeling.
Yeah, deeply primal.
Oh,
very human.
Incredible.
Yeah.
And I try my hardest to not, ruin the moment when you kill an animal by just being too, high fives and make it just too celebratory. I mean, it's something you're happy about, but it's a big moment, and I try to give like a little quiet time, just I don't know, whatever. You're not going to say it's a prayer, but just to kind of give thanks for the whole situation, right? And so that's it's a serious thing. I think a lot of people would benefit from that, because you just realize, like, when you're paying people to do the killing for you, you're still part of that, and just recognizing the magnitude of it, I think, would be good for people.
I was asked to kill a goat one time when I was in Kenya, and that was a surreal experience, because I felt like I couldn't turn it down, and I felt horrible about it because I had just never done it before. And you don't realize, like, that knife actually goes in pretty easy. It's like the blood comes out, the animal is gone fast, and like it zaps you into the experience of like life and death is but a breath away. Like one cut of an major artery gone,
and you're done. And that's the weird thing too, like where you're see these animals, and I love watching them, and they're beautiful, and why would anybody want them to die? I don't want them to die. But then once you decide to be a hunter, it's just like laser focus, and you're all about, how am I going to achieve this? How am I going to get this done? And it's like you're 2 different people, just depending on the activity you're engaged in at the moment. And I find it weird. It's definitely, there's a little evolutionary switch that gets flipped, I think, that brings you back to that predator and prey relationship.
Well, I think, like, I often think about how much our worlds have changed as human beings, right? Like the very fact that you can sit in a room that's 72 degrees in the middle of summer is something that is almost magical. Like, you would be a wizard if you could go back to other points in history and be like, no, we just sitting there at 72 degrees is perfect. We sleep at 68 degrees. We put blankets on in the middle of summer, right? It's just like mind blowing. Yeah. But to even go further back and to be like, most Americans have never killed anything that they're about to eat, right? And like, how much does that separate you from food and the human experience? Now, I don't know how you resolve that or what good it would do to do it, but like, we have so completely changed that. Right. Are we the same humans that we were?
That's a great question. Like, I've wondered that myself. Like, do we still have, if the ability inside us to suffer to the degree that people used to suffer? Like, if we had to, or is that gone?
Yeah, I mean, I don't
really know.
Like I think about those guys that were trenchers that would like spend a week underground in these tiny trenches, going and prepared to knife fight the next guy to death, right? Like, what would have to happen now in my life to make me prepared to do that for my family? Would I be able to do it if it was called to do it? I don't know. I'd like to think I was, but those people seem much better prepared for the level of suffering they went through.
Yeah, just the difference, just the how hard people used to be, and like, I really honestly don't know if we've got that within us. I mean, we have obviously more than,
you can go past 10, like you said.
You can go past 10, but yeah, do we have that ability in us anymore? I don't really know. But that's where like that, like the climbing and then the wilderness travel. It's like, I guess that's what you're looking for. You're just trying to prove to yourself that you still got it, so to speak, Like, we're going, just less than a month going up to Alaska and doing a moose hunt. And it's a river float moose hunt. They drop us in and throw a couple rafts, and then we got to carry them to this river and float 62 miles on a river and pick us up on the other end, and we'll have moose that we kill and bring them on downriver with us. And like, that's just all suffering the whole time, but it's just such a great, you're just removed from your world completely, and you just don't get that very often,
You are taking such advantage of your ability to move your body, to build things, to climb mountains, to go hunting. What would your life be like if you were a quadriplegic?
Oh man, I've thought about that too. And you see these people that manage to just have good attitudes and while they're paralyzed, and I think that's just. I guess I'd like to think that I would make the best of whatever situation I'm in. I would like to see myself as that kind of a person. But I don't know. I can get pretty dark and down when things are good. So it's that's the thing that's such a gift is an overused term, but like to just be able to choose to go do something. My wife had a real back problem earlier this year and had to have surgeries. And when that's in doubt and you really don't know what the future looks like for somebody that was fit and healthy, and now you're having a problem, you don't know if surgery is going to fix it. It really got us into that state of mind. Like, what if she can't do all of the things that she loves and that I do with her? Like, what does life look like? Well, then obviously you figure it out, right? But you just don't want to have to.
Yeah, that's right. I had a growth on my neck a couple weeks ago, and I had not really taken it all that seriously. I was like, no, nothing bad ever happens to me. That can't be bad. And then I was like, hey, honey, I'm going to the doctor in a couple of days. Do you think I should show him this? And she freaked out, right? And so I had to face for a couple of nights going to sleep being like, what if I was wrong and this is a death sentence? And like, when I was younger, when I was going surfing in those waves, my parents would have been sad. Oh, poor us that we lost our son. That'd be bad. But there would have been no real consequence to the universe. Now, if I die because I was being irresponsible, there are 2 children and a wife that I've loved that now their lives are going to be so radically altered that you're going to bed at night being like, oh man, did I really screw this up? Is this because I spent my 20s smoking cigarettes? Is this like, and that's one of those things that, again, like we're talking about primal experiences, having to confront, am I going to die like soon? Not like this metaphorical, someday I won't be here. Like confronting that is a very important part of living.
Yeah. It's, to recognize, like, I remember it was maybe in my early 30s where I had my first moment of like, where I had some killer weird headache shows up just out of nowhere and just knocks me in my knees. And so you get your brain scan and then you're waiting a couple days to find out. And, it turned out to be nothing, but at the time,
mine did too, by the way. Yeah, I'm totally fine.
At the time, you don't know. And I remember that was the first moment where I thought like, yeah, I don't want to die. It was just that first, I never thought of it like that before, and it was real, and I'll never forget it. I remember where I was in the moment when that came to me. And so, and I think that's just part of that process of getting, from that youthful confidence and complete hubris to just this sort of fraught people that we are in middle age, where it's just like, you just see all the risks out there and you just know too much. And then you're starting to realize like, okay, I get why old people are the way they are. I get it now. Because eventually you're just seeing like all the things that can go wrong. And at some point it just wears out your brain and, it just saps you of strength and you're focusing on all the things that can go wrong. And that's not productive. Right. But then you see when you're 20 and they think like nothing will go wrong. Like, well, that that's not really the way either, right? And so it's a fascinating process. And
A couple of weeks ago, I had Jack Milliken on. He's 25 years
listen
old.
to him. Yeah, he was great.
He was great, right? And I was sitting there being like, man, I remember when I was like, no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. I was like, man, do I wish I was back in that space? I don't know. Because you're sitting there and you don't want to be like, well, Jack, a lot of shit can go wrong that you don't control. But like at the same time, like you want somebody to have that much confidence.
He was great. And like, so that's when you complain about, how you were in your 20s. I mean, this kid's doing like, he's doing great. He's exactly where he needs to be. And then I heard that perfect and beautiful confidence. There isn't a doubt in his mind. And I'm like, you know what? You need that to make it through across all the obstacles. But then also that is the thing that can undo you. And so like, how do you make sense of that? Right? Well, you can't. And so you got to just eventually get your ass kicked enough and have enough close calls, dodge enough bullets that you're like, okay, this is real, right? And so I was just talking to Heather this morning about telling our son Drake, who's going off to college, like I mentioned, I told him something dumb last night. I said, just be careful. And I'm thinking today, be careful. That's stupid. That's what you tell like a 5-year-old, right? Okay, what do I mean by that? I mean, it's just like out in the mountains, there are forces of the universe that you cannot control, and they do not care if you live, if you die, if you're healthy, if you're happy, or anything. Those same forces are around us all the time, and you, despite your youthful confidence, cannot avoid their effects. So be aware. Hubris is the right word, right? Don't think you're untouchable. That's what I mean by be careful. And it's still not going to matter. You know that. It won't matter right now. It'll eventually matter, and that's like I think I heard you mention one time about like injecting, like context or whatever.
Like wisdom,
injecting wisdom,
and
like you can't. And so I look at it as like you're writing these notes down and they're stuffing these notes in their pockets and not reading them, right? Yeah, okay, whatever. And then eventually some moment happens and then they think, they dig around and they find that, okay, now I get what that meant. And then helps them process it, right? And so, but that's the maddening part. You just think, wouldn't it be easier if they could just listen and avoid the problems? But
yeah, I could just help you if you would only listen
to me.
Listen. But your metaphor there about like you're handing your child notes that they're shoving in their pockets and not reading is exactly right. And then, I can remember my dad saying, time is the most important thing that you have, and you are going to feel like you have an infinite amount of it. And then one day you're going to wake up and you'll feel like you don't have enough. And I remember being like, whatever, old man, like I got all this time. I'm never not going to have time. And then one day you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, he's right. All this pursuit of, money or wealth or, health or any of this is so that you can do with your time what you want. Right. You can use your attention in the way that you want. And it's so finite. And those times when you just threw it out the window or gave it away to dumb things.
Well, and like back to what we were talking about, like looking at Twitter, I keep calling it Twitter, X, I haven't made the change, but like there's the valuable amount to spend on that. And then the rest of it is squandering your time, right? And so like you think in a life that is busy as yours or mine, where the stresses are piled on deep and heavy, the self-loathing I feel when I get sucked in and I just waste time, and it's just weakness because I don't want to do the thing that I know I need to do. And this is just this thing that can kind of distract me and maybe for a few moments feel like I'm doing something of value. I feel it's like, what is wrong with me? Like that time is gone. It's never coming back. And what did I get out of it? And so I'm really good about like setting limits on the things that I go do, like social events and all that. I want them to be high value. I don't do a lot of things that I don't really want to do. There's some things in life you have to, but I don't fill my life with that, but I do struggle with the daily distractions, and the technology is a big one. I'm just thinking like that's a way to get your time back.
Well, Dave Helland, I'm so glad that you decided that it was worthwhile for you to drive all the way down here and do this podcast with me. So thank you so much for coming on.
It was great doing it. My pleasure.